Hang on.
Now, Kevin,
Okay.
try after it. It's too noisy, Kevin.
Kevin, it's too noisy. We can't hear you. So you'll speak afterwards. And Gavin, I check with the links with everybody because sometimes when I make calls before, people at that moment are in the loo, they're not ready. It's not necessarily if it's confirmed at 9 minutes past 5 that at 25 past 5 they're ready. Sometimes there's a call that comes in or something else. And then I've sent the link and there's a time limit. That's the issue. So every second counts. All right. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Gavin for a change to share an idea. Go.
No, I've got no ideas.
Any idea?
No, forget it. I have to prep something. There's no ways I can just.
So I'll share a quick idea. So
you share. So I can't think of anything, but I'm also not feeling 100%. So no.
Okay. So Rabbi Rancohen brings an idea from the Maharol, and I hope that this year is a refuah for his wife, Leah Masha Basara, that her markers are down from her cancer chemo treatment and she's healthy, because the markers are but up this week. So please God, may every year we do have an aid and a benefit for her refuah. So one of the ideas he shared from the Maharol is that there are the world stands on 3 pillars. It stands on avoda, service of Hashem. It stands on acts of chesed, acts of kindness towards your fellow human being, and it also has a third standing, which is Torah. So those are the 3 things that the world stands on. Now, there are 3 cardinal sins that we're meant to give our life rather than transgress. One of them is murder, and that equates directly opposite to acts of kindness. Murdering is showing no mercy whatsoever. We're not talking about self-defense, we're talking about murder, and therefore it's the antithesis of kindness. So we have to give up our lives rather than taking somebody else's life. It's not to say in a position where there's a 1 bottle of water that is between you and a friend that you can't keep what is yours, but you cannot take his in order to quench yourself, but you don't have to give yours and give up your life in order to save his, because whose blood is redder. So we're talking in a case of just murder. So that's opposite to loving kindness of your fellow man. The other one is avoid a service of Hashem. The opposite is idolatry or blasphemy, at which for idolatry you mean to give up your life. And the Torah, which is the highest level, corresponds to the antithesis of sexual immorality, at which one has to give up their life rather than commit. And by that we mean you're not allowed to commit incest, you're not allowed to have an affair or adultery or any prohibited relationships. And where that obviously does prick the conscience of those that are generally single, is one has to be a little bit more careful with regards to adult entertainment or viewing series where you're seeing certain things. So it's just more conducive to Torah learning if you keep your mind clean. When somebody works how to do that, you'll let me know. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start on the Gemara share. What I'm going to do is I want to cover from what Gavin said is when Arthur on Saturday night obviously needed to deal with the family with food and help out his daughter Dina, and Kevin was a little tired, which is understandable after a long day, and Gavin also was feeling a lot of pain and not quite in it. So what I'd like to do is summarize some of the concepts before we can proceed forward, because there were a lot of layers that were coming out that complicated issues. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So one of the issues we were dealing with is what you call a guaranteed loss compared to a potential loss. So a guaranteed loss is the case that the Mishnah brings, that a person's honey is leaking out a barrel, and as a Jew, you use your wine to empty out of your barrel to save his honey and talk about compensation. But one of the side issues is you're talking about a loss that might be considered to be the ownership once it's lost, where that property remains in the public domain, and therefore it's no longer considered the property of the person who had it originally because he doesn't have utility of it. And one of the things we'll talk about is about mitigating risk. So the bottom line, and this is a side conversation from the Mishnah, is that if you have to give 10% away to Truma for the coin to have it, and your product is tefel, which means you're unable to get benefit from it until you separate Truma. And the same thing with Maisa, which is your charity portion to the poor, whereas the Truma is to the Levi, and the Levi gives his 10% to the coin. So until that's separated, your produce is considered invalid for use until those duties are fulfilled. And therefore, it's saying, since you have to give that away anyway, if you've got an object that in a matter of time is going to be damaged, but at right now it stands that it's intact, can you dedicate that to Maisa or Truma? Now, morally, we say, of course not, because why should the poor get something that will eventually be broken in the holy temple, and its Levium and Kohanim constituents end up suffering a loss? So obviously that is forbidden in certain cases, that you can't put your risk onto someone else. But from a legal standpoint, it's a little bit more complicated. Okay, one of the reasons it's complicated is, well, if it's a fait accompli that you're going to lose the item, you can't dedicate that to Truma or Maisa as you're getting a hole in your barrel in order to save you from that particular loss. You have to absorb it. But what we are saying is you can in a certain circumstances, and one of them is netting around the barrel. So if there's a leak, that there's almost a cloth on top of that item where the leak is slow, that there's going to be a negligible amount of loss, you may do so, but not if the loss is going to be in a matter of minutes or dramatic. It's almost it doesn't take effect in that particular case. So we talk about this netting, that in that case it's not regarded as ownerless. How this ownerless discussion happened is, I'm not going to go into the depth, except we're saying initially, why shouldn't the owner of the barrel of wine be compensated for his wine? Because technically, if the honey leaks, he can say all the honey's his. Never mind just compensation for his small amount of wine. So why should he just be paid for his labor in his container? So the Gemara is saying it's opposite to the Mishnah, is that you could say that the person that has the wine could claim all of it without even giving up his honey. Without even giving up his wine. So he should be entitled to get his wine back if he saves the person from the much more expensive honey loss by using that container. So, okay, so that's a case of guaranteed risk and mitigation of that risk by slow leakage. We then added another factor, and they say, look, you've got a person traveling on the road, he's got coins in his possession, he sees a robber coming towards him. He shouldn't say that the Maisa Shani produce that I have in my house is hereby deconsecrated upon these coins. We said, what was this deconsecration issue? You've got heavy produce that can go off. You've got to take it to Jerusalem. It's a shlep. So you can deconsecrate the holiness from the produce onto the coins, take the coins, travel to Jerusalem for one of the 3 festivals, buy produce there, and then transfer the holiness from those coins to produce in Jerusalem. But it saves you having to have the logistical cost and the risk of produce going off, etc., or whatever the case may be. So we're saying all of a sudden you see that your coins have a 50-50 chance of being stolen. And now all of a sudden you say, well, I'm now taking these coins that were just my coins and I'm deconsecrating them where they've got holiness from away from my produce. So if they're stolen by the robber, I don't have to make a trip to Jerusalem and the loss isn't mine. I just don't get to dedicate that as one of my services to the temple. The Gemara says, well, you can't do that, but you shouldn't do that, actually. But if you do it, it stands. So we're saying, how could there be this principle? Listen, It's one of two things. Either there's no risk, in which case you can do it, or there is risk, in which case you can't do it. How can you have a case where you shouldn't do it, but if you do it, it sticks? Now, that's what you call a concept of bidi eved. Bidi eved is after the fact. So I'm going to give you just a different definition of bidi eved. Bidi eved is a case of you shouldn't have a little bit of milk within a container of meat, because you should never mix milk and meat. But bidi eved, after the fact that the bit of milk splashed in the cholent pot, can you consume it? And it depends on the ratio. 1/60th, etc. There are different opinions. And then 2 kosher chickens, 1 non-kosher. Is it a ratio of a third? That's a different discussion. But bidi eved means after the fact that the drama has transpired, what can you do? Does it stick? Does it not stick? So that's a similar sort of concept here. So we're saying, listen, it's either one or the other. So the Gemara basically answers and says, look, but speaking of a case where he can save the coins, but only with difficulty. So although the coins are his own, he might, you can't transfer Meiser Sheni sanctity them. Why? Because there's a real possibility that they're going to be lost in the theft. But even if there exists a likelihood of loss, we do learn a brisa that supports this case where it's a probability where once you say, I dedicate, I deconsecrate my produce against these coins, it sticks. And how do we know this? Because we learn in a brisa, if a Levi had 10 barrels of contaminated tevel wine, okay, what is tevel wine? You can say, tevel means not fit for consumption. So it can either be tevel because you haven't separated Meiser Truma yet, or another reason something could be Tameh is that, tevel is that it's Tameh, meaning it has a spiritual impurity, at which case you can't consume it. Or you might have a physical damage where the wine has gone off, or the fact that you've left the container open and there's poison. But tevel means not fit for consumption for whatever reason. And we're talking about here Tameh wine from Meiser Rishon, from which the Trumas Meiser has not yet been taken. So we're saying, look, what's this Meiser Rishon? So we're saying an Israelite has to give 10% of what he makes as the first tithe. Okay? Gives it to the Levi. The Levi then says, I'm going to give Trumas Meiser to the Kohen. In other words, whatever he's got, and he gives 10% of that to the Kohen. Now, the Israelite cannot consume his 90% balance of stuff. It's actually like less, because he has to give to Trumas and Meiser. So whatever he's left with, he can't use that until the Levi has given the Kohen his portion. Okay? So we're saying that according to this, if he saw that one of them had become broken, what do we say? So he's got a barrel of wine and the wine will drain away. It's a matter of like relatively quick time. Or maybe became uncovered, at which that rendered it forbidden, because we said that if you've got a snake and it's got sufficient time to go from its lair to drink and then come back, there's definitely going to be venom there. It's not just water and wine. Milk, honey, fish brine, other liquids, they don't fancy so much. But we say the barrel is hereby Trumas Meiser upon its 9 fellows. So we're saying if that's the case, although the Kohen may not consume Truma, that is Tameh. So we're not talking about the case here of the poison. Before we deal with the case of the poison, we're saying there's a spiritual impurity. So in other words, there might be a sheretz or one of the animals that make it spiritually impure, and the Kohen can't consume that truma by mouth. However, he might be able to use it in a different way. In other words, he might be able to use it to sprinkle. So what are we saying is that, look, at the end of the day, there's a bit of mercy shown on the Israelite, because it could have become infected at the point that it was in the Levi's house, and that's kind of not the Israelites' fault. In terms of if it got infected in the Israel's house and then it was separated, Well, I don't think you can give you can't give something that you have all the function and somebody else has that which is broken, because that was already set in the first rule. So if you've got things that are tahor, pure, and you give away that which is tameh, you can't do that. But if all your stuff is infected, you can still give away what you have, because you're not qualitatively disadvantaging the other party. Okay, that's why you can't give away a barrel that's about to leak out with wine, unless the leakage is quite small, because there's a netting and the drippage is low. So we're saying in this case, the Levi's got it, and how can the Cohen accept it? So we're saying, look, there are various sorts of things that the Cohen might have to accept it, because that's all there is from that guy's portion, from the Levi's portion, and him from the Israelites' portion. But in that particular case, Tameh wine cannot be consumed. It can't be drunk. You don't want to make yourself spiritually impure. But the question is, can you touch it? So there's this Tumas Av, Tumas Shani. There's different types of Avatuma, different types, and there are levels of impurity of what you can touch, what you can consume, etc. But bear this in mind. Say the wine comes in a container. It doesn't necessarily mean the container is infected, maybe just the liquid. And therefore, if it's aged wine, you can use it for the aroma for sprinkling. And therefore, it has a use, so the Kohen can get it. But he can only get that wine that becomes broken. Say that that barrel of wine is tameh, impure, and then it breaks. You give it to the Kohen. Why? Because he hasn't lost a high level of value. I'm going to say how this relates to the deconsecrated coins now. But in other words, if the barrel contains oil and it's worth a lot of money, or if it contains Chivas Regal whiskey, it's a lot of money. But, and there you can't give a broken barrel. But in the case, unless there's a netting and the leakage is slow, etc., but you can, if that item is infected, like the wine, with spiritual impurity, that you can't drink it. So therefore, before that had a leak in the barrel, it wasn't worth much. It was used only for what, Gavin? For sprinkling for aroma. And therefore, it's not a big loss for the Kohen. So you haven't caused him a major loss. In that case, the Kohen would have to accept it. It's not as if you've got pure stuff that you were holding back from the Kohen, which you can't do. But it's not a big loss to him, because the tameh means that the broken barrel has lost its value. Okay? And therefore, according to that, you can give that Trumas Mice as a Levi to the Kohen, because it frees up the 9 other fellows. What does it mean, fellows? The Israelites' portion of what is left, so that he gets his. Okay? Now, we are saying that makes sense. Now, if the barrels contain oil, you can't do that because of the resulting loss for the Kohen. So let me explain to you what I mean, why we differentiate between oil and wine. Wine has got mainly one purpose in terms of its value, and that is to get inebriated and fraught drunk, okay, and enjoy the taste of wine. Sprinkling aroma is a secondary benefit, but it's certainly not primary. Oil has multiple benefits. You can either make latkes. It costs you latkes, so you might also make latkes on it. So that's number one. Number two, you can also use it for heat and warmth and cooking. In other words, let me put it like this: not to cook in where it's tameh, impure, but you can use it as fuel. What do we mean oil as fuel? Is that we don't mean cooking or certain types of fuel. We mean fuel for fire, which keeps you what? Not only warm, but also keeps the room light, so that you can derive benefit from. This is pre-electricity days. Well, this is current South African days, where you light candles in order to learn Shas. Okay, so it's modern South African relevance, and the rest of the world old-fashioned relevance before electricity. So what we are saying is here, oil has uses for kindling, for heat, for light, and there are benefits derived that are worth a lot of money, apart from consumption. And therefore, if the barrel starts to leak, that contains oil. You cannot use that, the Levi can't use that as Trumas Maisa for the Cohen, because he stands to lose a great deal. So that's when the secondary point comes in about the poison. So you say, well, what does the poison have to do with it? Well, the poison is very simple. Is that minute that oil is left open. The oil is a bad example because in the one case of the Gemara, it doesn't mention oil as a point where the snake or reptile would go. It mainly only mentions liquid water, wine, milk, honey, and fish broth. But let's assume there's a product similar to oil which can be used for things other than drinking. Then if it has a leak in, then you cannot give that to the Kohen as a Levi because he will lose all the other functionality. If it's already impure and the Kohen can't ingest that and get inebriated, then it's only useless for sprinkling. It's a low value, and therefore the Kohen's loss is not significant. Oil, you can't do that because the Kohen's now going to lose a lot of money because of the heat and light auxiliary benefits, even though there's not consumption benefits. Now, the other factor is if it's poisoned, because just say that for some reason there's poison in, or whatever the case may be. Now, all of a sudden, as a Kohen, you can't even use that for heat or light because the product itself is toxic. It's toxic. And therefore, since it's not worth a lot, if that barrel with the toxicity of the snake poison has a hole in it, you can use it as Trumas Maisa because it wasn't worth a big loss to the Kohen anyway. Okay? Makes sense, guys? Yes or no?
Yeah, that does. Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Simple one. When it just devalues, right, because there's a hole in it, okay, and you give it to the Kohen, I understand. But if it gets like a blemish in it, because you said sometimes it's actually got spiritual impurity, so you can't use it for eating because it has spiritual impurity, but you can use it for fragrance or whatever. How can the Kohen actually touch that, though?
No. Okay, excellent point. That's what I did mention before, and I'm pleased you asked it, is that there are different levels of tameh. So you asked two questions in one. Can I separate your questions? Firstly, wine can't be used for heat or lighting. Only oil can. Okay? So, Gavin, the first point of it is that wine's only benefit is to drink. That's the primary benefit. If you're using for the aroma for sprinkling, it's a very cheap product because at that point it's not fit to drink, either because it's gone sour and tastes like vinegar, but it's got an aroma to it like toilet spray. So it's got a very low value. If that barrel leaks with that wine in, because it's tameh, the Kohen can touch it, he just can't drink it because there are different levels of tameh. There's other tumas which you can't even touch, as you quite rightly said, but there are second degree and third degree tuma. And also, if the wine's tuma but not the container, that's also an issue. So we're talking about a fact that he can touch it and sprinkle it around. He just can't drink it. So that's the example.
So it's a low level of tuma.
Yes, yeah, excellent question. But oil,
that's a good answer.
Well, it's a different thing because if the oil's tuma, where he can't cook with it, he still gets benefit of light and heat. And therefore, if that barrel of oil has got a hole in it, the Levi cannot give it to the Kohen because he stands to lose a lot of money because the primary benefits are not cooking with it. It's as much heat and warmth and light. And therefore, that loss to the Kohen is big. So you can't say, oh, it's tuma, it's oil, it's got a hole in it, it's fine. Because there are other benefits to oil that aren't there for wine. So the value of the oil doesn't evaluate to the same degree. And again, we talk about tuma where you can touch it, you just can't consume it. You get it, Gavin. So in other words, I can't, as a Levi, give you oil that's spiritually infected because even though you can't use it for cooking, you can use it for heat or light. So if my barrel's got a hole in it and it's going to leak, I'm going to cause you a major loss. I can't do that with oil, but I can do that with tameh wine because the main purpose of wine is drinking. And therefore, the aroma sprinkling is of little value to you. So if it's tameh already and it then gets a hole in it, I can give it to you. because it wasn't worth much when it was tummy. The other part that adds complication to the mix is quite simply when now you've got it as an open barrel, and now it becomes infected with poison, at which case both the oil and the wine can't be touched. And therefore, if they can't be touched, and that occurred first before there was a leak in it, in that particular case, I can give it to you because you got no benefit from it, Gavin. And the oil and the wine in that case, you're not losing anything because of this, the toxicity. My question is on that, surely if I left to open the barrel, I shouldn't make you suffer the loss. As far as that's concerned, because I'm culpable. It's almost as if it's almost as if what's the term? I've caused you the loss by trying to mitigate my risk onto you with the broken barrel, or left it uncovered with his negligence. So we've got to assume that maybe the Levi got it from the Israelite, and there was a suspect uncovering, and the Israelite said to the Levi, listen, they're all uncovered. I'm not quite sure what to do, etc. In that particular case, I don't know how it works, but you can see the various factors that have been added onto this. Do you get what I'm saying? About how the poison adds an extra complication. Now we're adding another factor, and that factor is about coins and about possible risk. So we are saying here is that there is a bit of a difficulty, because that's look, in the case of the traveler who's faced by a robber, since the loss of the coins is not certain, the Gemara is suggesting at first it's permitted to transfer Maisa Sheni sanctity to them. And then we're saying, well, can you or can't you? That's basically the question that we want to ask. So what we are saying is here is in the question, the Gemara basically equates the minor loss represented by the draining away of the Tameh wine, which is guaranteed, with the possible loss represented by the approach of the robber. So, minor loss guaranteed of a low amount versus the possible loss of a high amount. Do you get what I'm saying? Now,
yeah,
this is where this principle comes in. The Gemara views an uncertain but major loss as the equivalent of a minor but inevitable loss. I'm going to repeat that concept again. It's the whole premise of it. An uncertain major loss is equivalent to a minor but inevitable loss. Now, all of a sudden, it basically means, accordingly, the Gemara asks, just as the Levi is entitled here to entirely designate the wine in the broken barrel as Trumas Maisa, because it's a minor loss to the Kohen because it's already Tameh, so too, Gavin, the traveler who's faced by a robber, that he could have the possibility of loss, is entirely permitted to transfer Maisa Sheni sanctity to those coins. Because they equate the risk value. It's not just the risk, it's the risk versus worth. Okay, so let's just have a primary example. You got 1,000 rand. Okay, and 1,000 rand. No, 1,000 rand's a bad example. Well, it's okay, 1,000 rand. So 1,000 rand, where the wine was worth 40,000 rand. It's 1,000 rand now that it's become toilet freshener. Is aroma because it's tumah and you can sprinkle it around. So that is equated to the coins that are worth 2,000 rand, where it's a 50-50 risk of it being stolen. Financially, it's the same. And the reason why you have to put the financial amount at a similar sort of bracket is the minute the financial amount alters and your risk changes, then that's going to change the factor. Okay, so one of them is a case where you've got Rav Yirmiyah that says, listen, the only time you're allowed to have wine in a broken barrel that's designated as Trumas Maisa, even if it's Tame, is when there's netting over the barrel and it's a very slow leak. So it's even a lesser loss to the Kohen. But then, because it's represented by a much smaller potential loss, you cannot equate that with the approach of the robber, because that's a 50-50 loss of a high amount. Therefore, if you're using that logic, according to Rav Yirmiyah, you cannot deconsecrate the coins on that sort of risk, because it doesn't match up with the sort of loss involved with the barrel. According to the Bava Kamma, he's not talking about whether or not there's netting on the barrel to slow a leak. He said it's really hardly worth anything, because there's it's tumah, so therefore it's only good for aroma sprinkling. Does that make sense? And therefore,
Yeah.
according to Rav Yirmiyah, the risk of the coins is too much because of the 50-50 probability with the high worth, compared to a slow leakage of Tameh wine that is not worth much other than for its aroma. Okay. So we've got another 7 minutes and then we are ready. So, all right. So the Gemara says, look, all's well in the case where the barrel became broken. For the wine saved by the netting is fit for use by Kohen. But let's take a case where the barrel becomes uncovered. It's not fit for a Kohen. Why? Because if it's imbibed with poison, nobody can touch it. So how can the Brisa permit the Levi to designate the contents of an uncovered barrel as Trumas Maisa, when in fact the Kohen can't touch it? It's a problem. So we can see even when none of the wine is used, the Levi can sanctify it, since the prohibition represents only a minor loss to the clans, to the Kohen. So here we're saying, listen, it's even more of a loss, but it's still a minor loss, because if the barrel has a hole in when it has poison, he can't even use it for sprinkling, but it already lost most of its value for the poison. Therefore, in the case of one faced by a robber, since the loss of his coin is not certain, maybe you can transfer Maisa Shani sanctity to them. So, Maisa Shani sanctity to them, okay? So the Gemara is basically turning around and saying that at the end of the day, all right, guys, Rav Schottenstein is trying to get hold of me. Can we end the share on this note?
Sure.
All right, I hope I was clear.
Yeah, it's crystal.